Hello musicians! In this video we're going to look at how to transform a piece of music through your own creative interpretive process. Have you ever wondered why in classical music we hear the same pieces again and again? Whether it be listening to a concert as an audience member, whether it be listening to recordings, or even in the learning process of our own, we seem to come across these pieces that have existed for hundreds of years. Why don't we move on to other music? Well, part of that answer is the fact that we get to enjoy the process of interpretation. We get to enjoy a performer's interpretation on stage. We get to enjoy a very refined and consolidated interpretation on recordings. And in our own learning process, we get to explore this music and make it our own through that interpretive process as well. It's one of the great joys of learning music. There are some types of music, let's say the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, for example, where you can play the right notes at the right time and it will sound pretty great. However, there's other music where it really needs a lot more input from the performer. Perhaps the music doesn't have much expressive instruction like dynamics or articulation, and also the music might be a little, and no disrespect to the composers here, but it might be a little bland, it might be a little repetitive harmonically, especially to our modern ears. So it really invites us to add a lot of our own creativity into the process. So in this video, I'm going to walk through a piece of music called Andante by Ferdinando Carulli, and you'll find that music below the video. And we're going to add layers of musical expression. And as we go along, we can explore these different tools and see how they impact the music. This piece is simply called Andante, and that means at a walking pace. So we're talking about the tempo of the piece. I might play it a little faster in this video simply because we'll get a very long video if I play this at the true Andante tempo. So to start off with, I want to give a baseline rendition. I'm not going to add any dynamics or articulation, or I'm going to remove as much expressivity as I can and just play the notes for their pitch and their rhythm. Here we go. So there it is. It's a nice piece. It's in C major as a key. It's using a lot of 1 and 5 in terms of harmony. So very familiar musical language. And I wasn't trying to play it badly by any means. So we've still got things like the melody standing out with the accompaniment nice and low. And inevitably, as I'm playing it through, there's going to be some elements of articulation and dynamics that creep in. But that's more or less a flat baseline for us to start working on this blank canvas. The first musical element I want to add in is dynamics. This will really grab our ears' attention as the music now starts to become alive. We fluctuate with crescendos as the melody rises. We might build up in dynamics, get louder, and as the melody goes down, we might get softer. In addition to this, we can have contrast, we can have louds and soft, and even grow our dynamics over a long period of time to make a sense of direction in the music, and also make longer musical ideas. So let's now have a listen to this piece with some dynamics added in. doesn't have to be too complex. We don't have to do things every single note, but it gives a lot of vitality to the music because it's changing, and it brings, it demands our attention that little bit more because we're interested in where it's going and what ideas the performer has. The next thing I'd like to add is articulation. Now, articulation can give a lot of character to a note, so we can add staccato and accents, and this might transform a simple melodic line to something like this. With accents. Now, of course, each one is going to be up to your own interpretation and your own sense of style. But I think it immediately adds a lot of character. We can have left-hand staccato, or we can use right-hand staccato, which has a slightly more sharp character. Or we can, of course, combine the both, which is usually what happens, to be honest. And we can use that in contrast to legato notes, connected. And it really offers a lot of character. An accent, sort of by definition, makes a musical note stand out. So we could do it in other ways other than dynamics, but in this piece it's really going to be a louder note than other ones. So I might use a rest stroke in the right hand to bring out a particular note. So let's now combine dynamics and articulation. So immediately the music comes alive, and combining the dynamic fluctuations with articulations now already transforms the piece, in my opinion. It gives a lot of creative possibilities. Next up in our creative palette is tone color. And tone color can be used to enhance things that we're already using. So for instance, a staccato note with a slightly more ponticello attack adds to the character of that note. And similarly, with a crescendo, what are we doing here? If we go a little more ponticello as we get louder, and then more tasto as we get softer, that can also enhance the crescendo-decrescendo effect. So these are all starting to be used in tandem. And now that we're adding in more elements, this is where we start to experiment and then start to choreograph on our pieces by marking in all of these ideas so we can have our interpretation a little more consistent as opposed to doing it on the fly. But here's a rendition now with dynamics, articulation, and tone colors. So a lot of combinations there to work with, and very fun to play around with in the creative process as well. Finally in this first group of 4, we're going to add tempo rubato. So this selection of dynamics, articulation, tone color, and tempo rubato really is the most common ways we're going to be adding creative elements to a piece of music. Rubato is going to be stretching the time, making it elastic so we can speed up or slow down. Slowing down at ends of phrases. Doesn't doesn't always have to be dramatic, it can be quite subtle. Usually towards the end we might get a bigger slowdown. But it offers a real, it just adds, it enhances all of these other elements because we now have a rhythm that is not so rigid, but rather becomes even more speech-like or vocal-like. And it also adds to all these expressive elements that already are being incorporated. So, let's now have a listen to dynamics, articulation, tone color, and tempo rubato. So it really comes alive with all of these ideas. Now, as we move away from these more standard interpretive tools, we get into the world of fingering. So the left-hand fingering that we choose on the guitar can greatly impact how it sounds. For instance, we can use open strings in that first position, which arguably makes it a little easier to play. But if we change that fingering, we get the option there to use left-hand staccato a bit more on the lower line instead of using open strings. We also just get a different sound when we play on different strings. You know, this note here, G, compared to this G, compared to this G, sound different. So they offer us variety. When you take notes away from open strings and put them on fretted notes, they really give you an element of control for vibrato, for tone quality, and they don't pop out as much. Sometimes when you play open strings, they sound different in tone quality. The equivalent of giving a speech and changing on one different word. That's not the greatest example. But let me give you an example here. That open E is pretty bright naturally on the first string. But if we did this, the tone quality is more consistent. We also get this lovely portamento that we can play around with, and vibrato that we can add as well. So it really adds a lot of options and ideas for us. Okay, let's have a listen now with dynamics, articulation, tone color, rubato, and I'm going to change some of the fingering. So you can see I'm playing around with some ideas there, and sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes I don't get it just the way I want it, and that's where the practice process comes in, where you have an idea and you can sort of improvise it just for fun. And when you get something you really want to add into an interpretation, perhaps for a recording or a performance, that's where you workshop it and make sure that the choreography of the left and the right hand and your fingering choices can be relied upon to get that musical idea. The last thing I'll say about fingering choices is that when we're learning a piece, sometimes, and I talk from experience, you can be celebrating when you find a repeat. The same musical material comes back, so we don't have to learn it again. But we do have an opportunity there to create variety. We often think, should I play loud and soft and ponticello and tasto? But actually we can create variety just by changing the left-hand fingering. So you could play one set of left-hand fingering to start off with. And then just as a character in a story goes through a process and goes through change. Maybe by the end of the piece, when that same material comes back, we play it differently. Just an idea. All right, now we have creative embellishment, and this is where we start to actually move away from what's written on the page. You could argue we started doing that from the very beginning, because if there are no dynamics, we're adding in things onto the page already. But creative embellishment might mean you're adding in ornaments. You might be augmenting rhythms, or you might be even adding in some notes. In some styles, the Renaissance and Baroque are good examples of this, you're actually expected to understand where you might add embellishments. In those styles you'll have trills and mordents and turns and different types of things that were commonly used. So they're actually left out of the musical score, and it's expected or presumed by the composer that the person playing this music would know the style of which it was composed and what other things to add in. But it really can also get into a creative process where we add things in that start to blur the lines between what the composer wrote and what you're adding in. So let's now play through. I'll add a few notes in and some embellishments, and you can tell me what you think. So I think it keeps the integrity of the music to a large degree, but it's fun to hear these little ideas that maybe surprise you, especially if it's a known piece. If it's something you've heard 10 times before, and then a performer on the stage plays it a little bit differently, adds a little bit of their own approach, that can be really refreshing. Finally, we could take this idea of creative embellishment and really take it to a place where it's no longer what's written on the score. We're using the score as a starting point, and we're adding a lot more to it from ourselves. Here I'm going to add in a cadenza-like element at measure 17, and I'm going to imitate what I was inspired by many years ago, and it's still very much inspired by, but Pavel Steidl, guitarist from the Czech Republic, took music of Paganini and Legnani and added a huge amount of his own ideas into this music, and it made it come alive. It was surprising, it was entertaining, it was virtuosic, and that, I think, for a lot of people that have seen him perform, was inspiring to see what you could bring yourself to a piece of music, how you could transform it through this creative process. Also, we could start adding in some other things on top of embellishments that really make it a little bit different than what's written on the score. So, here we go. So, I mean, some of those didn't work as well as I'd hoped, but you can see that we're really starting to reimagine the piece and bring our own personality, our own creativity to this process. So I hope this has inspired you to take a piece like this, and in fact you can take this very piece. I invite you to download the music and record your own version with all these different elements and paste it down below, and we'll see what people come up with. I think it'd be very interesting. But as always, I hope you are inspired by these ideas, and I wish you well. Bye.